Welcome back to Rob Sandstorm Designs. This is the last in a video series on how to design and make a flag for Memorial Day. As you know, if you've been following the series, this is the second Memorial Day in which I've done a special project for Memorial Day. Last year it was a plaque and this year it was this flag. I hope you've enjoyed learning how to do this flag and have been following along. And this is the last in the series where we actually surfaced the epoxy and then finished the flag. I hope you've picked up a thing or two in the series. And with that, let's get started. Okay, welcome back. We're at day 4 of this process. The first 3 days was first carving in the flag itself, then pouring a clear cut so that I could put a clear coat of epoxy in there for preventing bleeding. The next one was to carve out the black area. We carved out the black so we could pour the black. The third day of the process was to carve out the white area so that we could pour the white of the epoxy. And now we've let that harden and it's good and hard. And it's time now to surface this thing. It's time to surface this board, which means I'm going to clear off the top levels of epoxy, and I'll try to get some video of that. Let me talk about a couple things. One is when I had started to pour the white, you remember that I held the board down with screws because I told you it looked like it was starting to warp a little bit. And I wanted to make sure everything was nice and flat when I carved the white. Now the white's been poured, I'm looking around, and although there's just a little flex, there's a little bit on this right side, but not much. So I'm going to go ahead and take my chances and surface it without the screws down. Let's talk about the clamping methodology. You notice I'm using side clamps. Now when I go over this board with the surfacing bit, I will actually go out a little bit. I have to be very careful and I kind of keep my eye on it. But just to give me a little more area, I have taken a small spacer board and put that between the clamps and this to try to give me just a little extra room, about 3/4 to 1 inch more room for the surface bit to travel. The next step is I've put the surfacing bit inside here. And I'm going to go ahead and start the surfacing, which means I'm going to have to turn on the dust collector because this resin will start to fly and I don't want it all over my garage. So I'm going to turn on the dust collector, which means that it inhibits a little bit of what you can see, but hopefully we'll see it well enough that we feel okay with what we're observing as we go through the process. So with that, let me go ahead and zero out the bit and do the dust collection. So the first thing I want to do is I come over here, my original XY0, and this is where I've been zeroing the board the whole time. I've got an X right where I've been zeroing it. And I'm going to come down to that and I'm going to see what that 0 looks like. So that would be the 0 right there. I'm going to come up about a 1/2 millimeter and I'm going to start my surfacing right there. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to just see how high up above the board the epoxy is and to see how well the surfacing bit's handling the epoxy and not getting in any big rip out. Work hard, get dough. I can't get no sleep, please make my... Well, we just finished surfacing. It looks pretty darn good if you ask me. I'm pretty happy with it. The part that I was worried about, the trigger, is good there. We've got a couple little ridges from surfacing that we always have from going back and forth in the different directions. But I'm going to sand that all out now, so I'll be taking this off and sanding it. I think it looks pretty good. Let me try to come up here a little bit and get a view from the top, and then we'll zero in on, see the trigger there? And the stars, I really like the way the stars have formed up nice and sharp. Everything looks good. So now we undo the clamps and remove the board and take it over for sanding. Can't wait to get it sanded. Well, I took the board off the plate. I took the board off the CNC, and then I started to cut where I had those hold down holes, and I found that the board was not completely square when I put it on, and as a result, there's about a 1/16 of an inch difference from this side to this side. So if I measure from here to here, it's 1 inch. If I measure from here to the edge, it's 1 1/16 inch, and the same thing happens on the other side. So I'm going to need to square off the board, and the way I'm going to do that is using my tapering jig. I'm going to, this is a jig I made before, so I've got it held down so this edge is exactly against the zero clearance, I will call it, and this one's just barely a 1/16 of an inch, and it should cut it off and square it away. Okay, now let's measure it. If everything worked right, this stripe should be 1 inch here and 1 inch over there. Okay, 1 inch, 1 inch, and 1 inch. Perfect. So now I need to not screw up which side it's on. So now when I turn this and I use this against the fence, this side will straighten out. And I'll take another measurement just to make sure. So this side is 1 inch, and this side is 1 inch. Perfect. This side is 1 1/16. This side is 1 inch. So I'm going to line this up with the fence. So now that's lined up perfect. And if I were to look at the other side real quick, I would see that it's going to take off about a 1/16 of an inch, about a half of the curve. Okay, so this is now 1 inch. And this is now 1 inch. Perfect. Now I just need to square up the other two sides. Now we're going to square the ends of the flag. There's about a 1/16 inch difference between this side and this side. And so if this is all square like it's supposed to be, I'm starting it against the blade over here. And then as I work across, it'll shave off just a touch over here. So now when I measure to the edge, it's a 6/16 there, 6/16 there. I check for square, square there, square there. So I think we're in good shape now. So now we want to make this 6/16 all the way across so it matches right there. Okay, perfect. 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 Now the flag is cut square and the design is square. We're ready to do the sanding. The next step in this process is to sand this board. I'm going to start with 100, 120 grit. This is 120. 120, clean it off. You'll notice I'm using my Festool. That's what I normally use on bigger surfaces. If this was a smaller one and I was doing the contours, I'd be using my Surf Prep. Well, it actually looks like I better go with 80 to start out with. Okay, it's time to move up to 120. I did the backside off camera. What you see me doing here is cleaning off my gummed up sandpaper with a gummy eraser that you can buy off Amazon. I'll put a link in the description if you want. Cleans it up pretty good and I can get more use out of my sander. I don't think there's much educational value in you watching me go through all the various grits of sandpaper. I do that and I get to the point where I'm satisfied. I've sanded up to 800 grit at this point, trying to decide whether I need to go any higher. I'm thinking actually that looks pretty good once I put the finish on it. It should look really nice. I'm going to wipe it down with some denatured alcohol. I don't know how well you can see the shininess there, but when you're using denatured alcohol, it evaporates pretty quick, so it's not as obvious. Let me try to take you up close. So that's kind of what the finish should look like. On that part. Now let's go over to the stars and see what they look like. Stripes. Yeah, I'm liking that. This is going to be good. I'm actually liking the way that looks. I'm liking the way that flag looks right there. What do you think? I'm going to be trying a new brand of lacquer. I normally use Deft spray lacquer, but they don't have it anymore in my store. And when I looked at it on Amazon, it was way too expensive. This is what they advised that I use at the paint store, so I'm going to give this a shot and see how it works out. And it's a satin, which is the finish I like. We'll see how it works out. Don't need someone to save me. Well, that'll be a wrap on this project. I hope you picked up a point or two along the way about how to work with epoxy, the potential for wood movement and its impact. One of the things you'll remember in this project was, in this video, I had to square up the flag because I didn't ensure that the wood that I was putting it on was actually square when I started with it. That's something that I don't normally have to do. I normally square it up first. Not sure where I lost it along the way, but I think that my saw sled was off a little bit and I had to adjust it when I wanted to square it up at this time. So I think that might have been where I went wrong. In any event, it was easy enough to square away. Remember, you have to have patience when working with epoxy. It takes time to dry. You've got to make sure it's fully dried before you carve into it. And then you need to take your time as you're working through the various grits of sandpaper and applying the finish. In this case, I applied a very easy finish. It was just a rattle can lacquer, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. Again, I hope you picked up a lesson or two along the way in the series. And until we meet again, wishing you the very best. If you think I deserved a like and you learned a thing or two, please give me a like with a thumbs up. If you want to hear more of my tips and tricks, not only working with epoxy, but other projects, make sure you subscribe to the video. Until we meet again in this medium, have a great day. Bye.